You don't deserve a say anymore, not after your little episode, she said, brushing my concerns aside like they were nothing but dust on her designer jacket. My name is Richard Mercer. I'm 54 years old and had built Mercer Construction from the ground up over the last 22 years, transforming a two-man operation into one of Seattle's most respected commercial builders with over 80 employees and projects across the Pacific Northwest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I watched in silence as Diane, my wife of 17 years, instructed my executive assistant to cancel my meetings for the month ahead. Richard needs to focus on recovery, she explained with practiced concern, while simultaneously removing the company laptop from my hospital bedside. 3 weeks earlier, while inspecting our largest project to date, a $40 million mixed-use development downtown, I'd collapsed on site. The diagnosis came quickly, a stress-induced cardiac event that the doctors called a warning shot. Not a full heart attack, but serious enough to land me in coronary care for 5 days, followed by strict orders for rest and rehabilitation. In those first disorienting days of my hospitalization, as I drifted between medication-induced sleep and moments of clarity, Diane had moved swiftly. By the time I was fully coherent, she had already convinced our CFO, Marcus, to grant her temporary signatory powers. Just until Richard's back on his feet, she'd assured everyone. What nobody at the company knew was that our marriage had been fractured for years, held together primarily by social appearances and financial entanglements. As I sat, propped up against hospital pillows, watching her confidently pocket my key, God, I didn't argue or create a scene. Instead, I simply asked when she'd bring me the pending contracts I needed to review. Her response cut deeper than the surgeon's scalpel that might have been used had my condition worsened. The company can't wait for you to recover, Richard. I've already signed the Westlake project documents using the power of attorney. The power of attorney. A document I'd signed 5 years earlier, during a period when international projects had me traveling constantly, meant only for emergency situations, where time-sensitive decisions couldn't wait for my return. It had never been intended as a transfer of corporate authority, but rather as a safety net for specific, limited scenarios. When my cardiologist entered the room moments later, Diane transformed instantly, the cool, corporate usurper replaced by the devoted, concerned spouse. Dr. Patel, I'm just making sure he's not stressing about work. You said stress was the enemy, right? Her performance was flawless. Dr. Patel nodded approvingly, completely unaware of the power struggle unfolding before him. Exactly right, Mrs. Mercer. Richard, you need at least 6 weeks away from the office. Any stress could trigger another, potentially more serious event. He turned to Diane. It's good he has you to handle things. I didn't correct him, didn't mention that in recent years, Diane had shown virtually no interest in the construction business, despite enjoying the lifestyle it provided. Didn't point out that her background in luxury retail had given her precisely zero experience in managing commercial construction projects, negotiating with subcontractors, or maintaining relationships with clients who'd trusted me for decades. I simply nodded, allowing her to play the role of supportive spouse while I processed what was happening. After they left, I reached for my personal phone, not the company one Diane had taken, and called the one person I knew I could trust implicitly, Alexandra Chen, my company's general counsel for the last 8 years. Alexandra had started as an inexperienced attorney fresh out of law school whom I'd taken a chance on when larger firms wouldn't. Now, she was one of the sharpest legal minds in Seattle's construction industry. Alex, I said when she answered, keeping my voice low despite being alone in the room. I need you to pull my corporate governance documents, all of them, and I need absolute discretion. Richard, are you okay? We heard about— I'm fine, I interrupted, but I need you to look at something specific, the power of attorney I granted to Diane. I need to know exactly what powers it conveys and what limitations exist." Alexandra didn't ask unnecessary questions. She understood the gravity in my voice. "I'll have it on your private email within the hour. Anything else?" "Yes. Don't tell anyone we spoke. Not Marcus, not the executive team, and especially not Diane." After hanging up, I sat back against the pillows, my mind racing despite the medications working to keep my heart calm. The company I'd built from nothing was now potentially in the hands of someone who had increasingly shown contempt for the very values that had made it successful: integrity, personal relationships, and quality craftsmanship over profit margins. What few people knew, what even Alexandra wasn't fully aware of, was that 6 months earlier, sensing growing tension in my marriage and Diane's increasing interest in company finances, I had made some quiet modifications to our corporate structure. A small holding company, established under my late father's name, now controlled 30% of Mercer Construction's most valuable assets, including our equipment fleet and real estate holdings. It had seemed paranoid at the time, a contingency I hoped never to need. Now it looked prophetic. The hospital television droned quietly in the background as I opened the email from Alexandra on my personal phone. Her assessment was clear and concerning. The power of attorney granted Diane significant operational control in my absence, but included a critical limitation: any structural changes to the company, sale of major assets, or adjustments to the board required explicit written consent from me, regardless of my medical condition. More troublingly, the document included a sunset clause. The powers would automatically renew every 30 days, unless specifically revoked. The clock was already ticking. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I spent that afternoon making careful, discreet calls from my hospital room, building a clearer picture of what had transpired in the 3 weeks since my collapse. Diane had wasted no time. She'd already replaced my executive assistant with her own friend from her social circle. She'd scheduled meetings with our largest clients, supposedly to reassure them about the company's stability. And most alarmingly, she'd begun discussions with Vertex Holdings, our largest competitor, and a company I'd refused to do business with due to their reputation for cutting corners and mistreating subcontractors. By evening, when Diane returned to the hospital with a small overnight bag and an unconvincing display of wifely concern, I had compiled enough information to understand what I was facing, but chose to keep my cards close. Rather than confrontation, I opted for information gathering. "How was your day at the office?" I asked, making my voice deliberately weak and grateful. "Busy," she replied, arranging fresh flowers beside my bed, flowers I noted she'd brought, in a Mercer Construction branded vase, using company resources for her performance. The Westlake project needed some adjustments to stay on schedule. I had to make some tough calls. "What kind of adjustments?" I kept my tone merely curious, not accusatory. "We're bringing in Johnson Concrete instead of Pioneer. They're offering a much better rate, and we need to watch margins on this project." I fought to keep my expression neutral. Pioneer Concrete was a family-owned business we'd worked with for 15 years. Their owner, Frank Pioneer, had once continued working on our projects even when we fell behind on payments during the 2008 recession. They weren't always the cheapest, but their quality and reliability were unmatched. Johnson was a large corporate supplier known for delayed deliveries and quality inconsistencies, exactly the kind of subcontractor I'd always avoided. "That's quite a change," I managed. "Frank's team has been with us since the beginning." Diane brushed imaginary dust from her sleeve. "Loyalty doesn't pay the bills, Richard. Besides, the difference will add almost 100,000 to our bottom line." What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that Pioneer's seemingly higher prices included expedited scheduling and priority delivery that had saved us from costly delays dozens of times over the years. The 100,000 saved would likely cost us triple that in schedule overruns and quality issues, but I simply nodded, as if too tired to argue. "You should rest," she said, checking her watch. "I've got dinner with Marcus and some potential investors. We're exploring options to scale the business while you recover." Investors? This genuinely surprised me. Mercer Construction had always been privately held, with no outside capital. Our independence was a point of pride and a key selling point with clients who wanted decisions made locally, not by distant shareholders. "Just preliminary discussions," she said dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about right now." After she left, I eased myself out of bed, moving carefully to avoid disrupting the heart monitor still attached to my chest. I needed to think, and the confines of the hospital room were becoming stifling. With slow, measured steps, I made my way to the small visitor area at the end of the cardiac ward, nodding politely to the nurses who watched me with professional concern. Seated by the window overlooking the Seattle skyline, I could see the downtown core where my company had contributed to a dozen major buildings over the years. In the fading evening light, I could just make out the construction cranes at our Westlake project, now apparently being reshaped in my absence. My phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. "Urgent. Found something. Can you talk?" I stepped into a family consultation room for privacy before calling her. "The corporate bylaws," she said without preamble. "I've been reviewing them alongside the power of attorney. Richard, there's something important here. The company has a specific provision regarding medical incapacity of the CEO." "Go on," I prompted. My interest piqued. "In the event of medical incapacity, temporary leadership can be established by either a designated proxy, which would be Diane under the power of attorney, or by majority vote of the executive leadership team if they determine the proxy is acting against company interests." My mind raced through the implications. Our executive leadership team consisted of 5 people: myself, Marcus, our CFO, Alexandra as general counsel, Howard, our operations director, and Patricia, our head of business development. With me incapacitated, that left 4 voting members. "Has Diane spoken with you about executive leadership team meetings?" I asked. "That's just it," Alexandra replied. "She's cancelled the weekly ELT meeting indefinitely, claiming you wanted to streamline decision-making during your recovery. She's been meeting with Marcus daily, but hasn't included Howard, Patricia, or me in any substantive discussions." This was a clear tactical move. Marcus, while brilliant with finances, had always been somewhat deferential to authority and likely wouldn't question Diane, especially if she was presenting herself as acting with my blessing. By isolating the other members of the leadership team, she was effectively preventing the very mechanism that could check her authority. "Alex, I need you to do something carefully," I said, lowering my voice as a nurse passed by the door. "I need you to quietly speak with Howard and Patricia. Don't raise alarms, but gauge where they stand. Would they support calling an ELT vote?" "If necessary." "I believe they would," Alexandra answered without hesitation. "They've both separately expressed concerns about some of Diane's decisions already. Howard nearly resigned yesterday when she cancelled our standing quality review protocols to fast-track the Westlake project." This news hit me like a physical blow. Those protocols had been established after a near-catastrophic structural issue early in our company's history, a mistake that had taught me the value of multiple inspection points. Removing them wasn't just bad business, it was potentially dangerous. "One more thing," Alexandra added. "There's a clause in the bylaws requiring the company to maintain its founding principles as outlined in the original Articles of Incorporation. One of those principles is explicitly about maintaining relationships with established subcontractors and not making changes based solely on price considerations. I smiled for the first time since my hospitalization. When drafting those articles, over 2 decades ago, I'd included several provisions that many had called unnecessarily idealistic. Now, they might prove to be the company's salvation. "Alex, I need you to prepare 2 documents," I said, my resolve strengthening. "First, a formal notice of executive leadership team meeting, citing the emergency provisions in the bylaws. Second, I need a comprehensive review of all decisions made under the power of attorney in the last 3 weeks, specifically highlighting any that contradict our founding principles. When do you need this?" I considered the timing carefully. The power of attorney would automatically renew in 7 days. I needed to act before then, but I also needed more information about Diane's dealings with Vertex Holdings. "Have it ready by Thursday," I decided. "And Alex, I need one more favor. Contact Frank Pioneer. Tell him not to sign anything terminating our relationship until he hears directly from me." After ending the call, I returned to my room, feeling physically drained but mentally energized. The cardiac monitor showed my heart rate had increased. During the conversation, something the nurses would undoubtedly note with disapproval. But for the first time since my collapse, I felt a sense of purpose returning. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Howard Mills, our operations director, appeared in my doorway carrying what appeared to be architectural drawings. "Just thought you might want to review these," he said loudly for the benefit of the nurse checking my vitals. Once she left, his voice dropped to a near whisper. "Alexandra filled me in. Things are worse than you know, Richard." Howard unrolled the plans on the overbed table. They weren't architectural drawings at all, but rather a printed copy of an email chain between Diane and Carson Vertex, CEO of Vertex Holdings. "These were accidentally copied to my department because they referenced operational protocols," Howard explained. "I don't think Diane realized they'd come to me." The emails detailed discussions not merely about collaboration, but about a potential sale of Mercer Construction to Vertex Holdings. Diane had gone so far as to have preliminary valuation documents prepared, significantly undervaluing our company's worth. The most recent email, dated just yesterday, included the line, "Once Richard's medical situation stabilizes, I'm confident I can convince him this is the right move. In the meantime, I suggest we proceed with integration planning." Integration, planning, the corporate euphemism for determining which employees would be retained and which would be made redundant in a merger. "She can't sell without my signature," I said, though with less certainty than I would have liked. "That's true," Howard nodded. "But she's positioning everything so that by the time you're well enough to return, the deal will be so far along that stopping it would cause massive disruption. She's creating a situation where signing might seem like the only reasonable option." It was a clever strategy. Present me with a near-completed deal, argue that backing out would damage client relationships and company stability, and leverage my still fragile health as a reason to reduce my burden by selling. "There's more," Howard continued grimly. "She's already promised Carson that your role would be eliminated in the new structure. You'd get a payout but no ongoing position. She showed him the medical reports, Richard. She's using your health, conditioned to argue you're no longer fit to lead anyway." The betrayal cut deep. Not just professional usurpation, but using my temporary weakness as justification for permanent removal. In that moment, something hardened within me, a resolve that superseded even my doctor's orders for avoiding stress. "Howard, I need your help. Does Diane know you've seen these?" "No, and I've been careful to maintain appearances. She seems to think I'm just keeping my head down to protect my job." "Good, keep it that way. Alexandra is preparing some documents. When they're ready, I'll need you and Patricia to act quickly and decisively." Howard nodded, rolling up the emails and tucking them inside his jacket. Patricia's with you too. She's furious about the Johnson concrete switch. They supplied. Her last home renovation and the foundation already has cracks. After Howard left, I requested a meeting with my cardiologist. When Dr. Patel arrived, I was direct. I need to know exactly what my limitations are, not what you'd prefer or what's ideal, but the absolute medical boundaries I cannot cross without significant risk. Dr. Patel studied me carefully. This is about your company, isn't it? Yes, I admitted. Certain matters require my attention sooner rather than later. He sighed, but spoke frankly. Your heart sustained minor damage, but the primary concern is preventing a recurrence triggered by stress. Physically, you could return to light office work now if absolutely necessary. No construction site visits, no 12-hour days, and you'd need to monitor your blood pressure and heart rate carefully. And if I follow those restrictions, then medically there's no reason you couldn't handle limited work responsibilities. He held up a cautioning hand. But I must emphasize that emotional stress, conflict, confrontation, anger poses as much risk as physical exertion. I thanked him for his candor, making a mental note of both the restrictions and the permissions his assessment provided. With medical clearance for limited work, another obstacle to reasserting control had been removed. Over the next 2 days, I focused on recovery while gathering information. Alexandra provided regular updates on Diane's activities, each more concerning than the last. She had scheduled a special presentation for our top clients for the following week, almost certainly to prepare them for the Vertex acquisition. She had also begun reviewing employee files, flagging veteran staff members with comments about adaptation to new corporate culture. By Wednesday, my 4th day of cardiac rehabilitation, I felt significantly stronger. The hospital had reluctantly approved my discharge for Friday, though with strict home care instructions. This accelerated my timeline. I needed to act before returning home where Diane could more easily monitor my activities. That afternoon, Alexandra arrived with the documents I'd requested, disguised within a get-well card and flowers. Everything's prepared, she confirmed quietly, helping me transfer the papers to my personal laptop. The ELT meeting notice cites Bylaw Section 4(3) regarding emergency leadership review. The power of attorney analysis identifies 17 distinct decisions that contradict founding principles, and I've included the relevant principle citations for each. And the third document? I asked. Alexandra smiled slightly. As requested, a formal temporary reassignment of your 30% holding company shares to the corporate trust, with triple signature verification requiring agreement from the original executive leadership team members excepting Marcus. This was my contingency plan. By placing those shares in trust with approval requirements from Alexandra, Howard, and Patricia, I was ensuring that even if Diane somehow forced through a sale, a significant portion of the company's assets couldn't be transferred without additional approval. It wasn't foolproof, but it created another layer of protection. The paperwork for the executive leadership team meeting is technically filed already, Alexandra added. As general counsel, I have the authority to call emergency governance meetings. It's scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m., citing urgent corporate governance matters requiring immediate attention. Diane can't legally prevent it without formally challenging my authority to call such a meeting, which would itself trigger a corporate governance review. Will Howard and Patricia be ready? Absolutely. They've reviewed all the documentation and are prepared to vote. They're following your instructions to maintain normal interactions with Diane until then. As Alexandra left, I felt the weight of the situation pressing on me. Despite the doctor's warnings about emotional stress, I found myself strangely calm. The path forward was clear, the necessary preparations made. All that remained was execution and confrontation. That evening, Diane visited briefly, bringing takeout food from an expensive restaurant that she knew I enjoyed. The gesture might have seemed thoughtful to an outside observer, but I recognized it as calculated, particularly when she casually mentioned that Carson Vertex had called to check on my health. "He seems like a decent man," she commented, watching my reaction. "Very concerned about your recovery. He suggested that running a company of Mercer's size might be too much strain going forward." "Did he?" I kept my tone neutral. "Interesting that a competitor would be so concerned with my welfare." "He's not just a competitor, Richard," Diane replied, setting down her fork. "Carson represents an opportunity. The construction industry is consolidating. Smaller companies like ours are being absorbed by larger entities with better economies of scale." "We're hardly small," I countered. 80 employees, projects across 3 states, a 22-year reputation for quality, and thin margins, increasing regulatory burdens, and a business model built entirely around your personal relationships," she shot back. "What happens when you can't work 60-hour weeks anymore? When your health forces you to step back permanently?" The question revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of what I'd built. Mercer Construction wasn't successful because I worked myself to the point of collapse, though that had certainly happened. It thrived because we'd established systems, trained people, and created a culture that valued relationships over short-term gains. "The company doesn't depend on me working myself to death," I said quietly. "It depends on maintaining the principles it was founded on." Diane's expression hardened momentarily before she recovered her composure. "Well, we can discuss the future when you're feeling better. The important thing now is your health." She checked her watch. "I should go. I have some calls to make before bed." After she left, I received a text from Alexandra. "She's scheduled a meeting with Vertex's attorneys tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Our ELT meeting is at 2 p.m. The timing couldn't be coincidental." Diane was moving faster than anticipated, likely hoping to present the leadership team with a fait accompli, a deal so far along that questioning it would seem obstructionist. I slept little that night, my mind turning over various scenarios. By morning, I had made a decision that my doctors would certainly disapprove of, but which seemed necessary given the accelerating timeline. After my morning cardiac check showed continued improvement, I asked the nurse about the possibility of a brief departure from the hospital. "I need to attend to an unavoidable business matter," I explained. "Just for a few hours this afternoon." My doctor said light office work would be permissible. The nurse was skeptical but agreed to consult with Dr. Patel. To my surprise and relief, he approved a temporary leave with conditions. I would wear a portable heart monitor, take a prescribed anti-anxiety medication to manage stress responses, and return immediately if I experienced any concerning symptoms. "I don't recommend this," Dr. Patel told me frankly. "But I also recognize that sometimes addressing the cause of stress is better than allowing it to build. Just promise me you'll monitor yourself carefully." I agreed, thanking him for understanding. By noon, Howard had arranged for a company car to pick me up discreetly from the hospital's side entrance. As I changed from hospital garments into the business clothes Alexandra had brought, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I looked thinner, somewhat pale, but my eyes held the determination that had built Mercer Construction from nothing. The anti-anxiety medication created a curious sense of detachment as we drove toward the company headquarters. I observed my own tension with an almost clinical interest, noting how my heart rate increased slightly as the familiar building came into view, but remained well within safe parameters. We timed my arrival for 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled executive leadership team meeting. Howard met me at the private elevator that led directly to the executive floor. his expression a mixture of concern and relief. "Diane's still with the Vertex attorneys," he reported as we ascended. "The meeting ran long. Marcus is with them, but he's been briefed on what to expect at the ELT meeting. He's uncomfortable, but says he'll evaluate the evidence fairly." The elevator doors opened to reveal Alexandra and Patricia waiting in the conference room. Their surprise at seeing me quickly gave way to professional composure. "Richard," Patricia stepped forward, briefly clasping my hand. "It's good to have you here, though I'm not sure your doctors would approve." "They've given conditional clearance," I assured her, taking a seat at the head of the table where I'd presided over countless meetings before. "Let's review what we know and what we're proposing." For the next 10 minutes, we methodically went through the documentation Alexandra had prepared, confirming our understanding of the bylaws, the limitations of the power of attorney, and the specific decisions Diane had made that contradicted company principles. At precisely 2 p.m., Marcus entered the room, looking uncomfortable. "Diane's just wrapping up with—" He stopped abruptly upon seeing me. "Richard, I didn't expect—" "How are you feeling?" "Well enough for this discussion," I replied evenly. "Please take your seat. We're about to begin." 2 minutes later, Diane entered, engaged in conversation with a man I recognized as Carson Vertex's legal counsel. She froze momentarily upon seeing me, but recovered quickly. "Richard, what are you doing here? This is exactly the kind of stress Dr. Patel warned against." Her concern would have seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know better. "I've received medical clearance for limited work activities," I replied calmly. "And this particular meeting couldn't proceed properly without me." Diane glanced at the Vertex attorney, clearly communicating that he should leave. As he gathered his papers, she took her seat, posture rigid with controlled anger. Alexandra formally called the meeting to order, stating for the record that all members of the executive leadership team were present. "This emergency session has been called under Bylaw Section 4(3) to review decisions made under the temporary leadership arrangement and to determine if those decisions align with company governance requirements." Diane interrupted immediately. "This is ridiculous. I've been acting under a legally executed power of attorney with Richard's full knowledge, which grants you certain specific powers," Alexandra continued smoothly, "but does not override the company's founding principles or allow for structural changes without explicit approval." I remained silent, allowing Alexandra to present the evidence methodically. She detailed each decision Diane had made that contradicted our established principles. The termination of long-standing vendor relationships based solely on price, the elimination of quality control protocols, the exploration of a sale without board approval, and most damningly, the misrepresentation of my medical condition to facilitate that sale. Throughout the presentation, Diane's expressions cycled between indignation and calculation. When Alexandra finished, Diane leaned forward, addressing her response primarily to Marcus. "These are temporary adaptations to ensure the company's financial health during a difficult transition. Every decision I've made has been to protect our bottom line and position us advantageously in a changing market." "By selling to a competitor without consulting the leadership team?" Patricia asked pointedly. "By exploring strategic partnerships," Diane countered. "Nothing has been finalized. I've simply been investigating options that would reduce Richard's burden and secure the company's future." "That's not your decision to make unilaterally," Howard stated firmly, "especially when it contradicts explicit provisions in our governance documents." The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with Diane defending her actions as necessary pragmatism while the others systematically dismantled her justifications. Throughout, Marcus remained largely silent, observing the exchange with growing discomfort. Finally, I spoke. I think we've covered the relevant points. According to the bylaws, the executive leadership team must now vote on whether the current temporary leadership arrangement should continue or be modified. Diane's eyes narrowed. This is a transparent attempt to undermine my authority while you're still recovering. If you were well enough to make these decisions, you wouldn't need this theatrical performance. On the contrary, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt. This is precisely how our governance system is designed to function. It ensures that no single person, including me, can make unilateral decisions that fundamentally alter the company's direction or values. Alexandra called for the vote. The question before the executive leadership team is whether to revoke the current temporary leadership arrangement under the power of attorney and establish alternative interim leadership until Richard's full return. Howard voted first. I vote to revoke the current arrangement. Patricia followed. I also vote to revoke. Alexandra, I vote to revoke. All eyes turned to Marcus, who looked deeply uncomfortable but resolute. Based on the documentation presented regarding departures from established company principles, I must vote to revoke. Diane stood abruptly. This is absurd. The power of attorney is a legal document executed outside the company structure. You can't simply vote it away. They're not voting away the power of attorney itself, I explained, removing an envelope from my jacket pocket. They're voting to implement the medical incapacity provision of the bylaws, which takes precedence in corporate matters. I slid the envelope across the table to her. These are the legal papers revoking your authority to act on behalf of Mercer Construction, effective immediately. Diane's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. I watched her scan the documents, her expression shifting from disbelief to cold fury as she realized what she was reading. The revocation wasn't just of her corporate authority. It contained a comprehensive accounting of every decision she'd made that violated company principles, along with the legal consequences of those violations. You can't do this, she said, but the conviction in her voice had faltered. We're still married. I'm still entitled to... This isn't about our marriage, I interrupted calmly. This is about the company and your fiduciary responsibilities. While acting under a power of attorney, those documents outline the specific breaches of those responsibilities. Alexandra spoke next, her tone professional. The executive leadership team has voted unanimously to implement the emergency leadership provision. Effective immediately, operational decisions will require approval from at least 2 members of the leadership team until Richard's full return to duties. Diane looked around the table, searching for an ally, but finding none. Even Marcus, who had initially supported her, was now avoiding eye contact. The reality of her situation was sinking in. She had overplayed her hand, counting on my extended absence and assuming no one would challenge her authority. This meeting is not the end of the matter, she said finally, gathering her belongings. I'll be consulting with my attorneys. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Richard, you're making a serious mistake. Your health can't handle the stress of running this company anymore. I was trying to secure our future. After she left, the room fell silent for a moment. Patricia was the first to speak. We should address the immediate issues, especially the Westlake project and the vendor relationships. I nodded, feeling a curious mix of exhaustion and clarity. Howard, contact Frank Pioneer immediately. Tell him we want to maintain our relationship and to disregard any termination notices. Patricia, reach out to our Westlake client contacts. They need reassurance about our commitment to quality and timeline. Alexandra raised a practical concern. Diane will still have access to company accounts and systems. We should implement security protocols immediately. Already in progress, Howard confirmed. IT began restricting access credentials as soon as the vote was finalized. For the next hour, we worked methodically through the most urgent issues created during Diane's brief tenure. The portable heart monitor I wore occasionally beeped with warnings when my heart rate increased, but overall remained within acceptable parameters. The anti-anxiety medication was doing its job, allowing me to focus on solutions rather than the emotional weight of my wife's betrayal. As the meeting concluded, Marcus lingered behind the others. Once we were alone, he spoke hesitantly. "Richard, I owe you an apology. I should have been more vigilant. You were operating with limited information," I acknowledged. "Diane presented her actions as having my blessing." He shook his head. "That's no excuse. I knew some of her decisions contradicted everything you've built here. He trailed off. "Just what?" "She made compelling arguments about modernization and market realities, said your health crisis was a wake-up call about the company's dependence on you." His voice dropped. "She showed me projections that made the Vertex merger look like salvation." This revelation didn't surprise me, but it did clarify something important. Diane's actions weren't merely opportunistic. They had been meticulously planned, possibly long before my health crisis. The medical emergency hadn't created her ambitions. It had merely accelerated her timeline. "Marcus, I need you to gather all the financial information Diane accessed. Every projection, every valuation document, everything related to the Vertex discussions. Can you do that discreetly?" He nodded, looking relieved to have a concrete way to make amends. "I'll have it for you by morning." After Marcus left, I remained in the conference room, gazing out at the Seattle skyline where several of our construction projects were visible. The confrontation with Diane had gone as well as could be expected, but I harbored no illusions that this was the end. She would regroup, consult attorneys, and likely attempt to leverage our personal relationship against the company. I needed to be prepared for what would come next. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Patel. "Monitor shows elevated heart rate for past 90 minutes. Time to return as agreed." I texted back a confirmation and asked Howard to drive me back to the hospital. As we descended in the elevator, he glanced at me with concern. "Was it worth it? The risk to your health, I mean?" I considered the question carefully. Some stresses can't be avoided, only managed. The company was at risk, not just financially, but everything we've built it to stand for. "The founding principles," Howard nodded. "They seemed abstract when you first brought me on board. I remember thinking they were just corporate window dressing." This drew a smile from me. Howard had joined Mercer Construction 12 years earlier as a project manager, initially skeptical of what he called my idealistic approach to the industry. Over time, he'd seen how our emphasis on relationships and quality had created stability that our competition lacked. "Those principles kept us afloat during the 2008 recession," I reminded him. "When other companies were folding, because they had no goodwill to draw on, we survived because subcontractors were willing to work with flexible payment terms. Clients stood by us because they trusted our word." The car ride back to the hospital was quiet, both of us processing the events of the afternoon. I used the time to compose a message to my 2 adult children, my daughter Emily in Chicago, and my son David in Portland. They needed to hear about the situation from me before Diane contacted them with her version of events. My message was straightforward. I'd experienced a health scare, but was recovering well. There were some business and personal challenges involving their stepmother that I would explain more fully when appropriate. For now, they shouldn't worry, but also shouldn't be surprised if they heard concerning reports from Diane. As we neared the hospital, Howard broke the silence. "What's your next move? Diane won't simply accept this outcome." No, she won't, I agreed. She'll likely pursue two tracks: legal challenges to the leadership team's decision and personal pressure through our shared connections. I need to stabilize the company first, then address the personal aspects. And Vertex, Carson won't be happy about losing the acquisition opportunity. Let Alexandra handle Vertex, I said. She has enough documentation of their willingness to proceed without proper authority to make them cautious about pursuing anything further. Back in my hospital room, Dr. Patel reviewed the monitoring data with a mixture of concern and relief. Your heart rate was elevated, but stayed below critical thresholds. No arrhythmias or concerning patterns. Still, I'd prefer you not repeat this level of exertion until your recovery is further along. I promised to limit my activities for the next several days, a commitment made easier by the knowledge that the immediate corporate crisis had been addressed. The executive leadership team would manage day-to-day operations while I focused on recovery. More importantly, they would operate according to the principles that had guided the company from its beginning. That evening, as I was reviewing some documents Alexandra had sent over, a nurse appeared at my door. "Mr. Mercer, your wife is here. Should I send her in?" I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. "Yes, please." Diane entered, her composure restored after the earlier confrontation. She had changed clothes, now wearing a more subdued outfit that projected vulnerability rather than corporate authority. It was a calculated choice, one I recognized from previous conflicts in our marriage. When direct confrontation failed, she would pivot to emotional appeals. "Your doctor says you're being discharged tomorrow," she began, taking the visitor's chair beside my bed. "I've prepared the guest room at home so you can recover in peace." The guest room. I couldn't help but note the implication. She shrugged slightly. "I thought you might prefer some space, given the circumstances." "Diane, let's not pretend. Today wasn't a minor disagreement about business strategy. You attempted to sell my company out from under me while I was hospitalized." "Our company," she corrected, "and I was exploring options, not finalizing anything. You're making it sound nefarious when I was simply being pragmatic." I studied her face, the woman I had shared 17 years with. At what point had our paths diverged so dramatically? Was it when the company became successful enough to provide the lifestyle she desired? Or perhaps when her social circle began to include partners of wealthy executives who didn't work themselves to exhaustion, building something from nothing? "The documentation suggests otherwise," I said finally. "The emails with Carson Vertex outline a clear intention to present me with a nearly completed deal." A flicker of surprise crossed her features. "You've seen the emails?" "Yes, along with the projected organizational chart for the combined companies that notably excluded me from any operational role." She recovered quickly. "That was Carson's suggestion, not mine. He was concerned about your health and thought a clean break might be better than ongoing stress." The practiced ease of her lie was almost impressive. I had read the emails myself. The organizational chart had been her creation, sent to Carson with commentary about easing me into early retirement. "Diane, I'm not going to debate what we both know to be true. The question is where we go from here." She leaned forward, her voice softening. "We move forward together, of course. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding during a stressful time. Once you're feeling better, we can discuss the company's future rationally. I still believe some form of partnership with a larger entity makes sense long-term." Her ability to pivot from being caught in betrayal to suggesting we continue discussions as if nothing had happened was remarkable. In another context, I might have admired such resilience. Now it only confirmed what I needed to do next. "I won't be returning to the house," I said simply. "I've arranged to stay at the downtown apartment until more permanent arrangements can be made. Mercer Construction maintained a small corporate apartment for visiting clients and partners. It wasn't luxurious, but it would provide neutral territory while I sorted through both business and personal next steps. Diane's expression hardened. That's an overreaction. Whatever disagreements we have about the business, we're still married. Are we? I asked quietly. In any meaningful sense of the partnership that marriage is supposed to be? She didn't answer directly. You're being dramatic. We've had business disagreements before. This wasn't a disagreement, Diane. You took advantage of my medical crisis to seize control of something I spent my life building. You systematically dismantled relationships I've nurtured for decades. You misrepresented my condition to facilitate a sale that would benefit you while removing me entirely. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion break through her composed facade. Not remorse, but frustration at being thwarted. You don't understand what I've been dealing with. Do you know what it's like being married to someone who puts a company before everything else? Who measures every decision against some idealistic founding principles instead of practical realities? I never put the company before everything, I countered. I put its values first: integrity, relationships, quality. Those aren't just business principles, Diane. They're life principles. She stood abruptly. And look where those principles landed you. In a hospital bed with a damaged heart at 54. My health issues weren't caused by principles. If anything, they came from not applying those principles consistently enough in my personal life. From ignoring warning signs about relationships that weren't built on mutual respect and shared values. The implied criticism hit its mark. Her eyes narrowed. If you're determined to be vindictive about this, you should remember that Washington is a community property state. Half of your precious company is legally mine. And there, it was the threat I had anticipated from the beginning. Diane had never shown genuine interest in running Mercer Construction. Her brief tenure during my hospitalization had demonstrated her incompatibility with its culture and operations. What she wanted wasn't the company itself, but the value it represented. I'm well aware of state law, I replied calmly, as is my attorney. Good. Then you understand that whatever little corporate maneuver you pulled today doesn't change the fundamental ownership structure in the event of a divorce. She retrieved her purse, moving toward the door. Think carefully about your next steps, Richard. A lengthy legal battle won't help your recovery. After she left, I lay back against the pillows, feeling the toll the day had taken. The monitor showed my heart rate had increased during our conversation, though not dangerously. The emotional stress, however, weighed heavily, not because I feared her threats, but because they confirmed how thoroughly our marriage had deteriorated without my fully recognizing it. I called Alexandra to brief her on the conversation, and the implied legal threat. She'll likely consult divorce attorneys immediately, I concluded. We need to be prepared. Already on it, Alexandra assured me. I've been in contact with Gregory Hawkins. He's one of the best family law attorneys in the state, with particular expertise in high-value marital assets and business interests. Set up a meeting for early next week, I requested. In the meantime, I need you to implement the second phase of our contingency plan. The second phase referred to a corporate restructuring we had discussed briefly during the leadership team meeting. It wouldn't change the fundamental ownership of the company, that would indeed be subject to community property laws, but it would protect operational control and ensure the company's founding principles couldn't be compromised through a forced sale or division of assets. Howard and Patricia are already reviewing the documentation, Alexandra confirmed. We can formalize it once you're discharged. The next morning, as promised, Marcus arrived with a comprehensive file of financial documents related to Diane's activities. Among them was a particularly disturbing finding. A separate bank account opened 3 months before my health crisis, into which Diane had been transferring small but significant sums from our joint accounts. The timing suggests premeditation, Marcus observed. These transfers began well before your hospitalization, with increasing frequency leading up to it. I nodded, processing this new information. Forward these to Gregory Hawkins. They may be relevant to establishing separate financial activities prior to any divorce proceedings. Dr. Patel completed my discharge assessment late that morning, providing detailed instructions for ongoing recovery. Limited work hours, continued cardiac rehabilitation, stress management techniques, and absolutely no construction site visits for at least another month, he emphasized. And Richard, I mean it about the stress management. Your heart needs time to heal. I assured him I would comply, though we both knew the coming weeks would inevitably involve some stressful situations. The key would be managing them deliberately, rather than allowing them to manage me. Howard arrived to drive me to the corporate apartment, having already arranged for my essential belongings to be collected from the house when Diane was known to be out. The apartment was sparsely furnished but functional, with the benefit of being only 2 blocks from our company headquarters. As I settled in, messages arrived from both my children. Emily expressed concern about my health, but also confusion. Diane had apparently called her with a very different version of events, claiming I was having cognitive issues following my cardiac event and making irrational business decisions. She suggested we might need to consider guardianship if your condition worsens, Emily wrote, her skepticism evident even through text. Dad, what's really going on? David's message was more direct. Mom always said Diane married you for your potential. Guess she's decided to cash in that investment. What do you need from us? Their perceptiveness didn't surprise me. Both had maintained cordial but distant relationships with their stepmother over the years, recognizing early what I had failed to see, that Diane's interest in family extended only as far as it benefited her social standing or financial security. I arranged a video call with both of them that evening, explaining the situation honestly but without bitterness. They deserved to understand what was happening, particularly as Diane seemed intent on involving them in her narrative. The company is secure for now, I assured them. The health situation was serious but manageable with proper care. The marriage. I paused, still processing this reality myself. The marriage is likely over. Diane's actions during my hospitalization revealed priorities and values fundamentally incompatible with what I believe in. You mean she showed her true colors when she thought you were too weak to stop her? David said bluntly. Something like that, I acknowledged, though I bear responsibility too for not recognizing the divergence in our values sooner. Emily, always the more reflective of the two, asked the question I'd been asking myself. Were there signs before this, things you overlooked? I considered this carefully. There were indications that Diane viewed the company differently than I did, as an asset to be leveraged rather than a creation to be nurtured. But I interpreted those as normal differences, in perspective not fundamental incompatibilities. The conversation with my children provided unexpected comfort. Their clear-eyed assessment of the situation and unwavering support reminded me that while one relationship had failed, others remained strong and true. By the call's end, both had offered to visit Seattle in the coming weeks. Offers I gratefully accepted. The next morning brought my first official day back at work, albeit with limited hours and responsibilities, as Dr. Patel had insisted. Alexandra met me at the corporate apartment to walk to the office together, using the time to update me on developments. Diane has retained Morello and Associates, she informed me. They specialize in high-conflict divorces with significant assets. Their initial letter arrived yesterday. Standard posturing about community property and demands for financial disclosures. And Gregory Hawkins? Meeting us at the office at 10. He's reviewed everything and has a proposed strategy for both the divorce proceedings and protecting the company. The Mercer Construction offices felt both familiar and strange as I entered for the first time since my hospitalization. Staff members expressed genuine pleasure at seeing me, though their greetings carried undertones of concern and curiosity. News of the leadership conflict had inevitably filtered throughout the organization, despite our efforts at discretion. In my office, I found everything meticulously organized. Alexandra's doing, no doubt. On my desk sat a stack of cards from employees wishing me well, alongside current project reports Howard had prepared to help me quickly reorient to the company's status. By the time Gregory Hawkins arrived, a tall, austere man with piercing eyes and an unexpectedly gentle manner, I had reviewed enough material to feel grounded in the company's current position. The Westlake project had experienced some disruptions due to Diane's vendor changes, but Howard had already begun re-establishing our relationship with Pioneer Concrete. Our banking relationships remained stable, though Marcus had implemented additional verification protocols for large transfers as a precaution. Gregory Hawkins closed the leather portfolio containing his notes and leaned forward, his expression serious but not grim. We had spent the last hour discussing the intersection of corporate protection and divorce strategy, territory that required careful navigation of both emotional and legal complexities. Mr. Mercer, based on the documentation you've provided, I see 3 critical areas we need to address, he said. First, protecting operational control of Mercer Construction during divorce proceedings. Second, establishing that certain assets may be separate property despite Washington's community, property presumption. And third, countering what appears to be a developing narrative about your cognitive capacity. I nodded, appreciating his directness. The company is my priority, not just its financial value, but its ability to continue operating according to its founding principles. That's precisely what makes your case both challenging and defensible, Gregory observed. Most high-asset divorces focus exclusively on financial division. Yours has an additional dimension, the preservation of business values that transcend monetary worth. Alexandra, who had joined us for the meeting, posed the question weighing on all our minds. Can Diane force a sale of the company through divorce proceedings? Gregory's response was measured. She can certainly request it as part of an equitable distribution. However, courts generally prefer solutions that preserve business operations while ensuring fair value distribution. Our strategy will focus on demonstrating that forced liquidation or sale would destroy value and harm many stakeholders beyond the two of you. The meeting continued with Gregory, outlining specific protective measures, many of which aligned with steps Alexandra had already initiated. The most promising avenue involved establishing that portions of the company represented separate property due to my development of it prior to the marriage and through certain inherited funds that had been carefully segregated in the company's early expansion. The documentation from your father's estate showing the specific use of inherited funds for the 2007 equipment purchase is particularly valuable, Gregory noted. It creates a traceable separate property component that remained distinct throughout the marriage. As the meeting concluded, Gregory left me with words that would guide my approach in the coming months. Richard, the strongest position in cases like this is one where you demonstrate steadfast commitment to fair division while firmly protecting legitimate separate interests. Courts respect principled stands far more than scorched earth tactics. After Gregory departed, Alexandra remained behind, her expression troubled. There's something we haven't discussed yet, she said. The personal toll this will take. A Protracted legal battle while you're recovering is not ideal, I acknowledged. But neither is surrendering something I've built over a lifetime to someone who's demonstrated she doesn't share its values. Alexandra nodded, understanding what remained unspoken. This wasn't merely about assets or even control. It was about legacy and purpose, the very reasons I had pushed myself to build Mercer Construction from nothing into a respected industry presence. To surrender it now would mean losing not just a company, but a life's work, embodying my deepest values. The following week brought my first project site visit since the hospitalization, limited to the Westlake development and approved by Dr. Patel with strict conditions. Howard accompanied me, watchful but not hovering, as we walked the perimeter of what would eventually become a mixed-use commercial and residential complex. The familiar sounds of construction, steel meeting steel, the rhythmic pounding of pile drivers, the backdrop of machinery in coordinated motion felt invigorating after weeks of sterile hospital environments and quiet offices. This was where Mercer Construction's principles became tangible in the precise execution of complex plans, in the safety protocols that protected workers, in the quality standards that exceeded industry requirements. Frank Pioneer, owner of Pioneer Concrete, met us at the site office, a gesture I recognized as both professional and personal. His company had nearly lost a major contract during Diane's brief tenure, a relationship built over 15 years. Almost severed for a marginal cost saving. "Good to see you vertical, Richard," he said, gripping my hand firmly. "Gave us all a scare." "Apparently not as much of a scare as Johnson Concrete gave you," I replied with a slight smile. Frank laughed, the tension of recent weeks momentarily broken. "Their bid was suspiciously low. I tried telling your wife they couldn't deliver at that price without cutting corners, but she was determined. And now? Howard called me personally the same day your leadership team met. We're back on schedule with only minor delays." He gestured toward the foundation work visible through the window. "Quality doesn't recover as quickly as timelines, but we'll get there." As we toured the site, I noticed subtle evidence of Diane's brief influence. Rushed work that would need reinforcement, material substitutions that didn't quite meet our standards, schedule compressions that had created cascading inefficiencies. None were catastrophic individually, but collectively they represented a departure from the principles that had built our reputation. "We'll need a full quality audit," I told Howard as we prepared to leave. "Not to assign blame, but to ensure we're building on solid foundations, literally and figuratively." "Already underway," he confirmed. "Patricia has been personally reviewing every change made during the interim period. Most can be remediated with minimal cost impact if addressed now." As we walked back to the car, I felt a profound sense of reconnection. The company wasn't just a legal entity or financial asset, it was a living creation with its own integrity and purpose. Defending it wasn't merely about protecting my interests in a divorce. It was about preserving something of genuine value to employees, clients, and the communities where we built. The divorce proceedings began formally the following week with the filing of initial motions. As Gregory had predicted, Diane's legal team pursued an aggressive opening stance, demanding comprehensive financial disclosures and temporary control of certain assets during the litigation process. More troubling was their motion requesting cognitive assessment, claiming my cardiac event may have affected decision-making capacity. It was a transparent attempt to undermine the leadership team's actions and potentially re-establish Diane's influence, but it required careful response nonetheless. Gregory countered with medical documentation from Dr. Patel, confirming my cognitive functions remained unimpaired, along with affidavits from the executive leadership team detailing the systematic nature of decisions made during the corporate governance meeting. They're testing boundaries, Gregory explained during our strategy session, seeing how far they can push and what approaches might gain traction. The cognitive capacity angle is weak, but creates inconvenience and potential. Public relations concerns if it generates headlines. The business press had indeed begun to take notice. The Seattle Business Journal published a brief article noting leadership transitions at Mercer Construction following the founder's health challenges. Though the piece was factually accurate, it hinted at questions about the company's stability that could potentially concern clients or partners. Alexandra recommended a proactive approach. We should control the narrative rather than responding to it. A limited statement addressing your health status and affirming the company's stable leadership would preempt speculation. I agreed, and we crafted a simple press release confirming my cardiac event, stating my return to limited duties with the support of the long-standing leadership team, and emphasizing the company's unwavering commitment to its founding principles and project. Commitments. The statement made no mention of the divorce proceedings or corporate governance changes, focusing instead on operational continuity. This strategic communication proved effective. Industry partners reached out with supportive messages, and several clients confirmed their confidence in ongoing projects. Even Carson Vertex, whose acquisition plans had been thwarted, sent a professional note wishing me well and expressing openness to more appropriate collaborative opportunities in the future. The personal front proved more challenging. Diane initiated a deliberate campaign among our shared social connections, presenting herself as the supportive spouse whose legitimate business concerns had been met with disproportionate legal maneuvers during my recovery. Several mutual friends reached out expressing confusion or concern, having heard only her carefully crafted version of events. I maintained a policy of dignified restraint, neither disparaging Diane nor engaging in detailed justifications of the company's actions. To those who asked directly, I simply stated that significant professional disagreements had emerged during my hospitalization that unfortunately extended into our personal relationship. This measured approach served multiple purposes. It preserved my energy for recovery and company leadership rather than social battles. It demonstrated emotional stability, countering any narrative about compromised judgment. And most importantly, it reflected the very principles I was fighting to protect: integrity even under pressure, respect for relationships even when strained, and quality of character even when tested. 6 weeks after my hospitalization, Dr. Patel conducted a comprehensive follow-up evaluation. The results showed significant improvement in cardiac function and stabilization of the concerning markers that had prompted my initial admission. "You've been following the protocols admirably," he noted, reviewing the monitoring data from my regular check-ins. Limited work hours, consistent medication adherence, cardiac rehabilitation attendance. It's paying dividends. "And the stress management?" I asked, knowing this had been his greatest concern given the ongoing legal proceedings. "Your heart rate variability shows improvement even during documented stress periods," he confirmed. "Whatever techniques you're employing seem to be working." The techniques were both practical and philosophical. On the practical side, I had established clear boundaries around work hours, implementing structured meditation periods and ensuring proper sleep despite the temptation to work through issues that arose. Philosophically, I had embraced a perspective that recognized challenges as opportunities to demonstrate principles rather than merely defend them. This mindset shift proved particularly valuable during the first major court hearing regarding temporary asset control during the divorce process. Diane's legal team pushed aggressively for temporary oversight of company decisions involving significant financial commitments, arguing that ongoing projects represented community assets at risk during what they characterized as a turbulent transition. Rather than meeting this with matching aggression, we presented a calm, structured alternative: continued operation under the executive leadership team oversight, with transparent reporting to the court on major financial decisions. This respected legitimate community property interests while preserving operational integrity, precisely the balanced approach Gregory had advocated. The judge, a seasoned jurist with experience in complex divorces involving privately held companies, recognized the merits of our proposal. Her temporary ruling established monitoring protocols that protected both parties' interests while allowing the company to function normally, a significant early victory that set the tone for subsequent proceedings. Outside the courtroom, Diane approached me directly for the first time since our hospital confrontation. "This could all be avoided if you'd simply be reasonable about evaluation and buyout," she said, her voice low but intense. "Dragging this through court serves neither of us." "I've never opposed fair valuation," I replied calmly. "What I oppose is compromising the company's fundamental character, something a forced sale or liquidation would inevitably do." She studied me with a mixture of frustration and calculation. "You always were stubborn about those precious principles. But principles don't pay bills, Richard. Eventually, you'll need to think practically." "There's nothing impractical about principles," I countered. "They're what built the company from nothing. They're what maintained client loyalty through economic downturns. They're what attracted and retained talent when larger companies offered higher salaries. Principles aren't abstract luxuries. They're concrete foundations." Her expression hardened. "We'll see how concrete they are when faced with prolonged litigation costs and project delays from the uncertainty." As she walked away, I recognized the implicit threat. She would attempt to increase pressure through extended legal proceedings, hoping financial pragmatism would eventually overcome principled resistance. It was a strategy that might have worked against a purely profit-driven organization, but fundamentally misunderstood what Mercer Construction represented. Back at the office that afternoon, I gathered the executive leadership team to discuss not just ongoing legal matters, but more importantly, the company's forward path, regardless of legal outcomes. This shift from defensive positioning to proactive planning marked an important psychological turning point. "We've spent weeks responding to the challenges Diane's actions created," I told them. "That was necessary. But now we need to refocus on building rather than merely protecting." Patricia, whose marketing background made her particularly attuned to perception issues, raised a valid concern. "Clients are standing by us so far, but continued uncertainty could affect new project acquisition. We need to demonstrate momentum." "Exactly," I agreed, "which is why I want to accelerate the East Side expansion we discussed before my hospitalization. The property is still available, the market analysis shows strong demand, and it would signal confidence to the industry." The East Side expansion represented a significant commitment, the establishment of a second office location to better serve growing communities east of Seattle. We had been researching the move for nearly a year, accumulating market data and building relationships with potential clients in the area. The timing now, while seemingly counterintuitive during legal uncertainty, offered strategic advantages beyond mere signaling. Expanding now also creates a new business unit, established clearly after the separation, Alexandra noted, identifying the legal benefit. It potentially creates some separation of assets for future growth. Howard, ever the pragmatic operations director, outlined the implementation challenges, but ultimately supported the direction. "If we're doing this, we should move decisively, secure the property, establish the core team, and announce with specific project commitments already in place." Over the next 3 weeks, the expansion plan transformed from concept to concrete. Implementation. I negotiated the property acquisition personally, leveraging long-standing banking relationships to secure favorable terms despite the ongoing divorce proceedings. Patricia developed a comprehensive marketing strategy that positioned the expansion as a natural evolution of our success, rather than a reaction to recent events. Howard identified key personnel for the new location, including several experienced project managers who welcomed the opportunity for increased responsibility. Throughout this period, my personal living situation remained temporary, the corporate apartment serving basic needs but lacking the character of a true home. This transitory arrangement, while practical during the legal process, began to wear on me emotionally. The apartment represented limbo, neither the married life I had left behind, nor a new beginning fully embraced. Emily, visiting from Chicago during a brief break from her architectural practice, recognized this impact immediately. "You need a real home, Dad," she observed bluntly during dinner at the apartment. "This place has all the personality of an airport hotel." I smiled at her directness. "It serves its purpose for now. Once the legal situation clarifies—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "That's backwards thinking. You're not putting your life on hold waiting for legal permission to move forward. The company isn't waiting. Why should you personally?" Her perspective struck me with unexpected force. I had indeed been approaching my personal situation differently than the company's, reactively rather than proactively, while pushing Mercer Construction to build and grow. Despite uncertainty, I had subconsciously placed my personal rebuilding on hold. Emily continued, her passion reflecting the design sensibility that made her a rising talent in her field. "Living spaces shape our mental state. This," she gestured around the sparse apartment, "reinforces transience and impermanence. You need a space that reflects continuity between your past and future, not this strange pause button." The chauffeur. Following weekend, with Emily's enthusiastic assistance, I began looking at potential homes, not as temporary shelters, but as spaces for genuine rebuilding. We focused on modestly sized properties within walking distance of the office, places that offered character without excessive space or maintenance requirements for a single occupant. The third property we visited, a renovated loft in a former manufacturing building, resonated immediately. The exposed brick walls and timber beams preserved the structure's industrial heritage, while modern renovations provided comfort and efficiency. Most compelling was the small rooftop garden accessible from the main living space, offering both privacy and connection to the urban environment. "This is it," Emily declared, watching my reaction as I examined the thoughtful details throughout the space. "I can see you designing a life here, not just waiting for court decisions." The property's owner, an older woman relocating to be near grandchildren, responded favorably to our offer, particularly when she learned of Mercer Construction's role in restoring several historic buildings in the neighborhood. The purchase agreement included a flexible closing timeline that accommodated the uncertainties of my situation while securing the property. This personal step forward provided unexpected psychological momentum that carried into the business arena. During a major client presentation for a potential hospital expansion project, our largest prospect for the coming year, I found myself speaking with a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. Mercer Construction brings more than technical capability to healthcare facilities, I told the hospital board. We bring an understanding that buildings designed for healing must themselves embody integrity at every level, from foundation to finishing details. When your patients and staff enter this space, they'll feel the difference that principled construction creates, even if they can't immediately identify its source. The presentation succeeded not through elaborate promises or lowest bid positioning, but through authentic conviction about our approach to building. The hospital CEO later commented that our obvious commitment to building values, not just buildings, had distinguished our proposal from competitors offering similar technical specifications. This contract, secured despite Diane's prediction that legal uncertainty would undermine our ability to win major projects, represented more than revenue. It validated that the principles I had fought to preserve had tangible market value. Clients could discern and were willing to pay for construction that embodied integrity, relationships, and quality. As the expansion plans progressed and the new home purchase moved toward closing, the divorce proceedings continued their methodical pace. Gregory's strategy of principled steadiness was bearing fruit. The court had rejected several of Diane's more aggressive motions, including attempts to depose clients about their decision to work with Mercer Construction and efforts to restrict certain business activities during litigation. The judge is clearly recognizing the distinction between protecting legitimate community property interests and interfering with business operations, Gregory observed after a particularly successful hearing. That's the foundation we need for the eventual property division negotiations. Those negotiations would ultimately determine how the financial value of the company would be divided, but the court's interim rulings had established crucial precedent. The company's operational integrity and founding principles were worthy of protection, regardless of ownership distribution. This judicial recognition reflected a broader truth I had come to embrace fully during the recovery and legal process. Principles aren't merely personal preferences or philosophical luxuries. They are practical, durable assets that create concrete value. They attract loyal clients, dedicated employees, and reliable partners. They provide stability during crises and direction during uncertainty. They transform mere businesses into lasting institutions. 8 months after my hospitalization, standing in the newly opened East Side office, surrounded by team members, clients, and industry partners celebrating this milestone, I felt a sense of completion that transcended the still ongoing legal proceedings. Whatever financial settlement eventually emerged from the divorce, the essence of what I had built remained intact. Alexandra joined me at the window overlooking the bustling construction site of our first East Side project. Did you ever imagine, during those hospital days, that we'd be here so soon? She asked. Not the specific circumstances, I admitted, but the direction, yes. Because despite everything, we never lost sight of what Mercer Construction truly is. Not just assets and projects, but principles in action. As if to punctuate this reflection, my phone buzzed with a message from Gregory. Settlement conference. Productive. Diane's team significantly moderated position. Details tomorrow, but we're approaching resolution that preserves operational integrity. The journey wasn't complete, but its most important destination had been secured. Not just the company's survival, but the preservation of what gave it true value. In protecting principles during crisis, we had not merely defended the past, but secured the foundation for building something even stronger. 1 year after my hospitalization, I stood at the edge of the Westlake project rooftop, gazing across the Seattle skyline as the evening light cast long shadows between buildings. The project was nearing completion, 2 months ahead of schedule. Despite the disruptions early in its development, what had once been just architectural renderings and construction plans now stood as a physical testament to resilience and recovered integrity. "Penny for your thoughts," said a voice behind me. Howard approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the site office. He handed me one and joined me at the railing. "Just reflecting on the journey," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "From hospital bed to here in 12 months, Howard nodded, understanding the weight of that simple statement. The finished building never shows the challenges overcome during construction, reminds me of people that way. His observation resonated deeply. Like this building, Mercer Construction had weathered structural threats and emerged stronger, though the scars remained visible to those who knew where to look. The settlement with Diane had finally been reached 3 months earlier, after a mediation session that Gregory had masterfully navigated. The terms represented neither complete victory nor defeat for either side, the hallmark of a sustainable resolution. Diane received significant financial compensation reflecting her community property interest in the company, structured as a 10-year payout that protected cash flow and operational stability. In exchange, she relinquished all claims to operational control or future involvement. The agreement included moderate non-disparagement provisions and clearly defined the separation of personal and corporate assets. Most importantly, the settlement explicitly acknowledged the company's founding principles as integral to its value and operation, effectively preventing any future challenge to their implementation. This unusual provision had been Diane's final concession, granted only after the court-appointed business valuation expert testified that these principles represented quantifiable market advantage rather than merely philosophical preference. "Did you see the letter from Westridge Hospital?" Howard asked, interrupting my reflection. "Just the subject line. Something about their expansion phase." Howard smiled. "They're accelerating the timeline for Phase 2. They're bypassing the traditional bid process and awarding it directly to us based on Phase 1 performance. Their board specifically cited our commitment to principled construction practices as the deciding factor. This news was significant beyond the revenue it represented. Westridge Hospital had initially been skeptical about our ability to deliver during the legal turbulence, requiring special contractual assurances before proceeding with Phase 1. Their vote of confidence now validated that we had not merely survived the crisis, but had actually strengthened our market position through it. "That's the third client this quarter to expand their relationship with us," I noted. "Seems your theory about demonstrating values during pressure is proving correct." Howard had coined a phrase during our darkest period that had become something of a company mantra. Principles proved under pressure become permanent advantage. What had begun as an encouraging reminder during challenging days had evolved into a core strategic insight that shaped our client communications and team culture. The settlement with Diane, while resolving the immediate legal conflict, had necessarily changed the company's financial structure. The payment obligations required careful cash flow management and strategic prioritization of projects. Rather than viewing these constraints as limitations, however, we had transformed them into criteria for more selective growth, choosing projects and clients aligned with our core values rather than pursuing maximum volume. This selective approach had yielded unexpected benefits. Profit margins actually increased despite moderately reduced revenue as we focused on projects where our principled approach created distinctive value. Employee satisfaction metrics improved substantially, with several talented team members noting they had declined higher-paying offers from competitors specifically because of our values-centered culture. "The East Side office exceeded projections again this month," Howard reported as we walked back toward the site elevator. "Patricia's thinking we should consider a similar model for the Tacoma market next year." The East Side expansion, launched during the height of uncertainty, had proven remarkably successful. The office had reached profitability 3 months earlier than projected and had established Mercer Construction as the premier commercial builder in that rapidly growing market. The decision to expand during crisis, once seen as risky, now appeared prescient. "Let's review the market analysis next week," I replied. "But tell Patricia I'm open to the concept if the fundamentals support it." This measured growth philosophy reflected another lesson from the past year. Strength comes from building on solid foundations rather than rapid expansion. Each new initiative needed to reinforce rather than dilute our core principles. Expansion would happen not for its own sake, but as the natural expression of a healthy organization living its values. As we descended in the elevator, Howard updated me on several personnel matters, including the promotion of Jason Chen, a promising project manager who had demonstrated exceptional commitment during the company's difficult period. Jason had personally worked weekends to correct quality issues that had emerged during Diane's brief tenure, refusing additional compensation and stating simply that doing it right matters. "He reminds me of someone," Howard commented with a meaningful glance in my direction. "Hopefully someone who learned to balance commitment with sustainability," I replied, acknowledging the personal growth the past year had forced upon me. My cardiac rehabilitation had evolved into a consistent health regimen that Dr. Patel now cited as a model for his other executive patients. The reduced work hours initially imposed as a medical necessity had become a deliberate practice, creating space for reflection and renewal that actually enhanced leadership effectiveness. What had begun as physical recovery had transformed into a more holistic rebuilding of life patterns. The loft I had purchased, initially just an alternative to the temporary corporate apartment, had become a genuine home, reflecting this balanced approach. Emily's design influence was evident throughout the space, which seamlessly combined functional work areas with spaces for relaxation and connection. The rooftop garden, initially just a pleasant feature, had become a daily sanctuary for morning meditation and evening reflection. Most significantly, my relationship with my children had deepened considerably. David had relocated from Portland to Seattle 6 months earlier, joining a software firm that developed applications for the construction industry. While maintaining professional boundaries between our respective careers, we enjoyed regular dinners and weekend hiking trips that had been rare during my workaholic pre-hospitalization years. Emily, though still based in Chicago, had arranged quarterly extended visits, during which she combined professional networking with family time. Our shared interest in design and construction provided natural connection points, but our conversations increasingly explored broader life questions that we had rarely addressed during her growing up years. Back in the site office, I reviewed the day's progress reports, while Howard coordinated with the project superintendent about the next day's schedule. The rhythms of construction management were familiar, but my engagement with them had fundamentally changed. Before my health crisis, I had tracked details out of anxious perfectionism. Now I monitored patterns to ensure alignment with larger purpose. The difference was subtle but profound, from control to stewardship. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Dinner with Marcus and his wife to celebrate his 10th anniversary with the company. The reminder prompted reflection on how our professional relationship had evolved through the crisis. After his initial support of Diane during my hospitalization, Marcus had struggled with questions about his judgment and loyalty. Rather than punishing this lapse, I had engaged him in deeper conversation about the values that should guide difficult decisions. This restorative approach had transformed potential resentment into genuine growth. Marcus had emerged as an even more valuable leader, bringing heightened awareness of the connection between financial decisions and company principles. His development embodied another core lesson. Principled leadership seeks to build people up rather than simply judge their failures. As Howard and I walked toward the parking area, Alexandra called with news that would significantly impact our trajectory. The judge overseeing a final administrative matter in the divorce had issued her closing memorandum, a document that normally receives little attention, but in this case contained remarkable observations. She specifically cited Mercer Construction as an exemplar of principled business practice that creates tangible community value beyond shareholder returns. Alexandra read from the document. She noted that preserving such businesses represents important public policy, even within necessary marital asset division. This judicial recognition, while having no direct practical effect on the already settled divorce, provided powerful external validation of our approach. It also established a helpful legal precedent for other privately held businesses facing similar challenges, something Alexandra suggested might warrant consideration in how we shared our experience within the industry. The judge is essentially saying that companies built on genuine principles deserve special consideration in preserving their operational integrity, Alexandra summarized. That's a significant endorsement of everything you fought for. After ending the call, Howard and I continued toward our vehicles, digesting this development. You should feel vindicated, he observed. An objective third party with no stake in our business, recognizing the validity of your stance. Not vindication, I corrected gently. Validation. There's a difference. Vindication implies triumph over an adversary, a proving of right against wrong. Validation, however, confirms worth and value independent of conflict. The distinction reflected how my own perspective had evolved, from defending against Diane's actions to affirming the inherent value of principled construction regardless of her choices. That evening's dinner with Marcus and his wife Sophia at their home provided welcome community after a full day. As we enjoyed Sophia's excellent cooking and shared stories from the company's history, I was struck by how these relationships now extended beyond mere professional association into genuine connection. I've been meaning to ask, Marcus said as we moved to the back porch with coffee after dinner. Have you heard anything from Diane recently? The question wasn't asked with malice or gossip, but from genuine concern about closure. I appreciated his directness. Only through attorneys finalizing the last details, I replied. I understand she's relocated to San Diego, started a luxury real estate consulting business. Are you okay with how everything turned out? Sophia asked carefully. The question invited honest reflection rather than a superficial response. I'm at peace with it, I said after a moment. The financial cost was significant but fair. The emotional cost was higher than the financial one, but it catalyzed growth I probably needed, and the company emerged with greater clarity about what truly matters. It's remarkable, Marcus observed. A year ago, we were all bracing for potential collapse. Now we're stronger than before the crisis. His observation echoed a perspective I had been developing throughout the recovery. True resilience isn't merely about returning to a previous state after disruption. It's about emerging with new strengths precisely because of having faced challenges. The Japanese art of kintsugi came to mind. Broken pottery repaired with gold, creating something more beautiful and valuable because of, not despite, the damage experienced. After dinner, driving back to my loft through the quiet Seattle streets, I reflected on the subtle but profound shifts in my understanding of success. Before my health crisis and the subsequent corporate and marital challenges, I had viewed success primarily through the lens of achievement, projects completed, company growth, financial stability. These remained important, but they now existed within a larger framework that emphasized alignment with core principles. This perspective had practical implications for Mercer Construction's future direction. Our strategic planning now explicitly evaluated potential projects and initiatives against our founding principles, declining opportunities that offered profit but required compromise on quality or relationships. Rather than limiting growth, this principled selectivity had actually created distinctive market positioning that attracted clients who shared similar values. The most significant change, however, had occurred in my understanding of leadership. I had always seen myself as responsible for protecting the company I had built. The past year had taught me that true leadership involved creating conditions where others could carry principles forward beyond any individual. This shift from founder-centered to value-centered organization had emerged not as abstract theory, but as practical necessity during my absence. Howard, Alexandra, Patricia, and even the initially wavering Marcus had demonstrated that principles, when genuinely shared rather than merely imposed, could guide decisions without constant founder oversight. This realization had transformed how I approached my role, from primary decision-maker to principle clarifier, from controller to culture builder. Back at my loft, I spent some time in the rooftop garden before heading inside. The evening air carried the scent of herbs and flowers I had planted during recovery, following the suggestion of my cardiac rehabilitation therapist, who had emphasized the healing power of nurturing living things. What had begun as therapeutic activity had evolved into a metaphor for the kind of leadership I now aspired to practice, creating conditions for growth rather than demanding specific outcomes. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Thomas Hargrove, owner of Vertex Holdings, the company Diane had attempted to sell to during my hospitalization, requested a meeting. The message came through proper channels, without presumption or pressure, acknowledging our complicated history but suggesting potential mutual benefit in conversation. After consulting with Alexandra about any legal concerns, none that would prevent exploratory discussion, and with Howard about operational implications, I agreed to meet Thomas at a neutral location, a private room at the downtown Seattle Athletic Club, where we were both members but rarely crossed paths. Thomas was waiting when I arrived, rising to shake hands with surprising warmth. At 68, he remained physically imposing and mentally sharp, though recent industry rumors suggested he was considering retirement transitions. We exchanged brief pleasantries before addressing the situation directly. "I want to clear the air about what happened last year," Thomas began, surprising me with his candor. "Carson was handling the Mercer Construction discussions without my direct involvement. When I finally reviewed the details after everything fell apart, I was disturbed by the approach." This admission was unexpected. Thomas Hargrove had a reputation for aggressive business tactics that had often placed Vertex Holdings at odds with my own approach to the industry. "The valuation was deliberately lowered," he continued, "and the representations about your health situation were, frankly, inappropriate. That's not how I built Vertex, regardless of what some in the industry might think of our methods." "I appreciate that clarification," I replied cautiously, "though it raises the question of why you're telling me this now." Thomas smiled slightly. "Direct as always. I'm approaching transition age, Richard, looking at Vertex's future and my legacy. The company has grown substantially, but I've been reflecting on what makes growth meaningful versus merely profitable." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Your stand to protect Mercer Construction's principles, even at significant personal cost, has been noticed throughout the industry. It's made me reconsider certain aspects of how Vertex operates." The conversation that followed was one of the most unexpected and thought-provoking of my career. Thomas outlined his concerns about industry trends toward consolidation that prioritized efficiency over quality, and questioned whether the competitive approach that had built Vertex remained appropriate for current challenges. He described a growing personal conviction that construction companies had obligations beyond shareholder returns, responsibilities to communities, environments, and future generations who would inhabit the structures they built. "I'm not suggesting Vertex should become Mercer overnight," he clarified. "Our companies have different histories and strengths, but I do believe there might be collaborative approaches that preserve what's valuable in both while addressing industry challenges neither can solve alone." The proposal that emerged was not a merger or acquisition, but something more nuanced, a collaborative framework addressing specific industry challenges where our combined resources could create impact beyond what either company could achieve independently. Initial focus areas included sustainable construction methods, improved labor conditions across the supply chain, and apprenticeship programs addressing critical skilled labor shortages. We would remain distinct companies with different approaches to everyday business, Thomas emphasized, but on these specific initiatives, we'd combine resources and expertise towards shared goals. The proposal merited serious consideration. I promised Thomas a thoughtful response after discussing with my leadership team, making no commitments but acknowledging the potential value in his suggestion. As we concluded the meeting, Thomas offered a final reflection that resonated deeply. Your health crisis could have been the end of what you built, Richard. Instead, it became a clarifying fire that burned away everything but what truly matters. There's a lesson there for all of us who build things meant to outlast us. The leadership team's response to Thomas's proposal reflected the growth in our collective thinking. Rather than reflexive rejection based on past conflicts, they engaged thoughtfully with the potential benefits and risks. Howard identified operational synergies in sustainability initiatives. Patricia recognized market advantages in presenting unified approaches to certain challenges. Alexandra outlined governance structures that could protect each company's distinctive culture while enabling productive collaboration. Marcus, whose financial perspective had evolved most dramatically through our challenges, offered perhaps the most insightful observation. A year ago, we were fighting for survival and principles. Seemed like luxury items. Now we recognize principles as the foundation of our success and can consider collaboration from strength rather than necessity. That's the difference between principled pragmatism and mere compromise. After thorough discussion, we developed a measured response to Vertex, expressing openness to collaboration on specific initiatives while maintaining clear boundaries around our respective corporate identities and approaches. The resulting framework agreement, finalized 2 months later, created a joint sustainability initiative that quickly gained recognition for pioneering approaches to reduced carbon construction methods. This unexpected development with a former adversary embodied the transformation in my understanding of business competition and success. Rather than viewing principles as competitive disadvantages that limited options, I now recognize them as distinctive assets that created unique possibilities. Firms without clear principles might achieve short-term gains through opportunistic maneuvers, but they lacked the foundation for building lasting value or meaningful partnerships. 18 months after my hospitalization, standing on the stage at the Regional Construction Industry Awards ceremony, I found myself reflecting on this transformed understanding as Mercer Construction received recognition for excellence in principled business practice, a newly created category inspired partly by our journey through crisis to renewed purpose. The award acknowledged not just the quality of our construction work, but the integrity of our business model, how we treated subcontractors during payment challenges, how we prioritized worker safety beyond regulatory requirements, how we honored commitments even when contract terms might have allowed technical escape routes. These weren't separate from our business success but fundamental to it. In my brief acceptance remarks, I shared the insight that had emerged through personal and professional rebuilding. True principles aren't abstract ideals disconnected from practical reality. They're the essential foundations that determine whether what we build, whether structures, companies, or lives, will stand the test of time and pressure. In construction, we understand that cutting corners on foundations to save time or money inevitably proves costlier in the long run. The same holds true in how we conduct business and build relationships. Later that evening, as team members celebrated at a local restaurant, I stepped outside briefly for fresh air and perspective. The Seattle skyline glittered against the night sky, the silhouettes of cranes marking ongoing construction projects throughout the city. Among them stood buildings Mercer Construction had helped create over 2 decades, physical embodiments of principles made tangible. Alexandra joined me on the restaurant patio, handing me a club soda with lime. "Quite a journey from that hospital room," she observed. "If someone had outlined this path back then, would you have believed it possible?" I considered her question thoughtfully. The specific developments? No, but the direction. Perhaps, because even in that hospital room, watching Diane walk away with my laptop and company key card, I never doubted the enduring value of what we had built. I just couldn't yet see the path to preserving it. And now I understand that preserving principles isn't primarily about defending against threats. It's about continuously building on them, allowing them to shape not just what we accomplish, but how we accomplish it. I gestured toward the celebration visible through the restaurant windows. It's about creating something larger than any individual that carries those principles forward. Indeed, as we returned to join our colleagues, I felt profound gratitude for the crisis that had nearly destroyed everything I had built. Without that crucible experience, I might never have fully recognized the distinction between building a successful company and building an enduring legacy. The former requires skill and determination. The latter demands principles that transcend any individual and continue creating value long after their originator's direct involvement ends. My heart attack and Diane's subsequent actions had initially seemed like ending points, the collapse of health, marriage, and corporate control in rapid succession. Instead, they had become inflection points, redirecting energy toward deeper purpose and more sustainable success. The principles I had always valued, but sometimes failed to fully embody, had become the very foundation of renewed strength, personally, professionally, and organizationally. What remains after the fire burns away everything else isn't merely what survives, it's what truly matters. In my case, that proved to be the principles that had guided Mercer Construction from its beginning: integrity in all dealings, respect for relationships, and uncompromising quality in every detail. These weren't business strategies to be discarded when inconvenient, but essential foundations that, when truly embraced, created both meaning and sustainable advantage. The legal papers that had so shocked Diane that day in the conference room hadn't simply preserved control of a company. They had protected something far more valuable: the opportunity to demonstrate that principles, properly understood and consistently applied, represent the strongest foundation upon which anything of lasting value can be built. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.